between the UK and other countries or in resolution of a conflict, if it ever existed in the post-war period, is probably expired now. That's not to say this is an incredibly important thing for the Prince to do, but I actually think one of the more interesting elements to it is how the UK reconciles with its own history in the Middle East, which is of course very deep and not without its own complexities and controversies. And from that perspective, I think it's a very healthy development.
Necessarily to carry that weight on his shoulders, is it?
Can you repeat the question?
Sorry, I think we might have lost me. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
No, my question was about the fact that I hear what you say about the UK's history in this part of the world, but is it for the young prince to carry that on his shoulders?
No, I don't think so. And I think actually that's maybe the refreshing opportunity here. I mean, he can approach it as a younger generation of the royal family and perhaps bring some level of closure, or at least addressing in a healthy way Britain's role around, you know, the establishment of the State of Israel and the mandate in Palestine in the 1940s. I mean, you remember he's going to be going to bed tonight in the King David Hotel, which was a British military installation that was bombed in 1946, killing 91 people. His great-grandfather handed over Mandate Palestine to the League of Nations, or to the United Nations. His own family helped to establish the Hashemite dynasty in Jordan. So there's a line of continuity there, but I guess what is possible with the younger generation of the royal family is to make a break from it. And I remember in 2011 when the royal family made that historic visit to Ireland, it was a very healthy and cathartic thing to do. Now, the parallel isn't exact because the conflict and the occupation continues in Israel-Palestine, but it's still an important opportunity, I think. And you've got to remember as well, a royal, and particularly a younger generation of the royal family, can do things that politicians can't do. So he can go and meet Palestinian refugees in the West Bank on Thursday, which is part of the agenda. He can go and visit the peace-building community, which often, you know, leading politicians don't have time to do or don't maybe prioritise. So that's an opportunity in itself, I think, to be able to do a different sort of job when visiting the Middle East than is the case when a politician visits.
He's still going to find it, or he still has to be wary, presumably, John, to tiptoe through the raindrops when it comes to certain words and phraseology.
Of course, but I think in that sense it's refreshing and encouraging that the palace issued a statement that restated British policy and indeed European policy and international norms on the conflict, on the status of Jerusalem, on the West Bank. So that's helpful, obviously, considering what's happened with the moving of the US Embassy over the last 6 months. That will, I think, provide a more even playing field to work within. And I think as well, I mean, from the perspective of a non-political actor, like the Prince, there is an expectation that he shouldn't be there to answer policy questions. And as I said earlier, can maybe engage with the people a little bit more, because the peace-building community in Israel-Palestine is very much in a difficult place, I think, considering the current dysfunction. And somebody like the Prince who comes, goes and meets people, which is obviously always part of a royal visit, engages with people trying to create change. I mean, he's visiting the Perez Center, one of ALLMEP's member organizations, to meet young Jewish and Arab citizens of Israel playing football together. That's not usually the sort of thing that a prime minister or a foreign minister will prioritize. So there's an opportunity there, I think, and people probably won't judge too harshly, I would hope, any missteps that might take place within a very controversial conflict.
So is it a forward party for the diplomats?
I'm not so sure about that. I mean, it's interesting. The ambassadors and the consul general on both sides, I think, are very much looking forward to the visit. It's interesting. There was obviously a decision made here in Britain for this visit to take place. That's where the impetus came from. There's been 71 years when a visit hasn't been on the cards. And I think examining the reasoning behind that is much more around British current geopolitical and economic reality than it is necessarily around what's going on in the Middle East. And that's okay too, I think. I think for the Prince to come and, you know, represent the UK, again, representing civil society or sort of a less politicised element of Britain is probably a good thing, but it does also reflect, I think, perhaps a diminished role for Britain as a possible peacemaker, because the assumption always was, it wasn't always said, but the assumption was that a royal visit was being held off as some sort of leverage, and even fewer think the UK is going to be the prime broker for it. So in that sense, the pressure is off a little bit. I can't think of another head of state in a country with full diplomatic relations with Israel who hasn't visited up to this point, particularly one whose family has such a central role and history within the conflict. And actually, critically, he's going and visiting Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, who's been very isolated recently following the Trump administration's move of the embassy. And though this isn't a political meeting, it is some useful contact, I think, with the Palestinian president. And he's spending a significant amount of time in the West Bank, meeting ordinary people, as I said. I think that's really important and encouraging.
Fascinating stuff, John. Good to talk to you. Come back soon. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot.